right, we're here at topic 7.2, imperialism debates. So this is part of period 7. It's going to cover 1890 to 1945. So by the end of this lecture, you'll understand the key arguments for and against imperialism and how these debates that the United States was having reflected the broader themes throughout American history. So to set the stage for these imperialism debates, so first of all, the United States was entering a new phase of its development. So up until this time, you can see that the U.S. was continuously expanding its territorial expansion. And because of that, the United States really had no reason to look outside of what we currently call the United States. There was this idea of manifest destiny, and that was the idea that the United States was going to spread its territory from the East Coast, from sea to shining sea. If you remember the famous painting with Lady Liberty floating across and chasing the Indians away and bringing the light of democracy all the way to the West. And that was how the United States was expanding. And most of that was done prior to the Civil War. Now, after the Civil War, there was some territorial expansion, but you could think of it as kind of like non-aggressive territorial expansion. For instance, there was Alaska, which was purchased from Russia. And Russia, I believe, was in the middle of the Crimean War, something like that, and it needed some money. And Alaska was just thought of this big chunk of ice, and it was costing them more to defend it than they were getting anything out of it. So they sold it to the United States. They didn't want to sell it to Britain because they didn't want Britain to become more powerful. Hawaii, a little bit of a different story, but when the United States took Hawaii as a territory in the 1890s, it wasn't, what would you say? It wasn't through an aggressive conquering type of thing. There was no war that was fought. The Queen of Hawaii kind of abdicated when American troops showed up. And American troops were not coming there for the purpose of any type of warfare at all. When the American troops went there, an American naval vessel, it was in the area, and it was just going there to protect the interest of American property owners, really, to make sure that they weren't attacked, that they didn't have their property taken. And the Hawaiian Queen saw the American naval vessel and abdicated. And then the people of Hawaii formed a new republic, and then they voted to join the United States, not as a state, but as a territory in the 1890s. So those were some, what you could say, some expansion beyond the continental United States, Hawaii and Alaska. And the closing of the frontier, the U.S. Census Bureau says it happened in 1890. And so there was no more territory to expand to. Manifest destiny had just become destiny. We had reached it as a country. And you could think that the United States is having this debate. Should the United States continue to expand? Or is it wrong to expand? For various reasons. One of those is America has been an isolationist nation. George Washington said, don't go looking for monsters to fight in Europe. You're going to get entangled in these European affairs, and it's going to tear our nation apart. We're not strong enough to do that. And then also, there's this idea of democracy and people have the right to rule themselves. And in fact, that is the founding principle of the United States. And so going over and conquering other people would go against the founding principle of the United States. So you can see where the debate is, because the United States has been expanding because of manifest destiny. And that expansion is now closed. And so there's people who are going to think the United States should continue to expand. There was some success here in Alaska and Hawaii. It was kind of non-aggressive. And there's people who think the United States should not expand. Okay. So we're going to look at some of the arguments for imperialism. So there was a lot of economic competition. So U.S. industries needed new markets to sell their goods. Resources from territories like Alaska encouraged further expansion. So if you are a capitalist and you want to sell your products, you've built a bunch of, let's say you've built a bunch of factories and you want to sell your products, you're a trust, uh, let's say like Standard Oil or US Steel, and you want to sell your products to new markets, having the United States expand to take over new areas would create new markets. It's not so much like it is today. Today, we have the ability to sell things in markets without taking over that area, right? But it wasn't so much like that back then. For instance, in China, what we're going to see is that there's these spheres of influence, and only a country that had a sphere of influence, that had semi colonized that area of China, would have access to that market. Okay, so imperialists saw overseas expansion as a solution to America's economic and strategic needs. Overproduction in American factories and farms created a need for new markets to sustain economic growth. This was particularly true in American farms. Let's say you had wheat farmers. There was too many farmers, and with all the innovation that happened in farming, now there was overproduction. And so, what are you going to do? Why is overproduction bad? Wouldn't it be good to have too much wheat, to have too much food? Well, no, not really, because that drives the cost, or the price, you could say, down, the price that the farmer can sell and the cost that the consumer would buy, because of supply and demand. When supply goes up, demand is going to go down. And so people can easily get wheat prices are going to go down, the farmers aren't going to make enough money. And so this is part of what we could call the farm problem, okay? And so if the United States could expand the market for something like wheat to overseas, let's say sell wheat to China, then that could be a solution to the farm problem. And then also, like I said, there was this idea of these resources in Alaska, like gold, like oil, that are being discovered that can be used. And so these are some of the things. I don't think oil actually was discovered, was really until the 1890s, until later. But yeah, and so the United States is going to be thinking about expanding. Another thing is military strength. So you have Alfred Thayer Mahan's The Influence of Sea Power Upon History, and that's going to emphasize the importance of a strong navy. That's a book that is going to influence people all over the world, and nations are going to think about increasing their naval power. So, and then Congress authorized a modern steel navy. And so Mahan's book highlighted the importance of naval power and global dominance, and his ideas pushed Congress to authorize that modern steel navy, which enabled the United States to compete with European powers like Britain and Germany. Okay, so there's also going to be cultural and religious justification. So you have Josiah Strong's Our Country promoted spreading Christianity, and Western values. And then you also have social Darwinism that justified domination of weaker nations. So Strong's writings added a moral justification for imperialism, portraying it as a Christian duty to uplift quote-unquote uncivilized nations. Social Darwinism provided a pseudoscientific rationale asserting that weaker nations were naturally destined to be dominated by stronger ones. All right, so we've seen some of the arguments for imperialism. Now we're going to see the arguments against imperialism. So first of all, with self-determination. So anti-imperialists are going to counter against the imperialists that imperialism strongly contradicts Americans' founding principles. So they're going to draw parallels to the American Revolution. They're going to argue that the U.S. shouldn't impose control over other nations. After all, if the United States rejected British imperialism, how can we justify being an imperialist power ourselves? Secondly, isolationism. And so they're going to cite George Washington's warning against foreign entanglements. And in his farewell address, Washington warned against foreign entanglements. The anti-imperialists believed that imperialism would entangle the U.S. in costly wars, and that would eventually undermine its independence. For instance, if somebody comes and attached to the United States, and we spend all of our military assets somewhere else, we could lose our independence. Lastly, there was constitutional concerns. And so there was this question, do the U.S. constitutional rights apply to territories? And there was something called insular cases, and this is going to be after the Spanish-American War, when the U.S. acquires places like Puerto Rico and the Philippines, and what rights do people have there? In other words, does the Constitution follow the flag? And so these are cases that came before the Supreme Court, and they're going to raise significant legal and ethical questions. And the Supreme Court is going to rule that constitutional rights did not automatically extend to U.S. territories. And so there's going to be this two-tiered system. And so there was something like incorporated territories, and an incorporated territory was a territory of the United States that was on the path towards statehood. And then there was unincorporated territories that would be a territory that was not going to become a U.S. state. And so what the Supreme Court said was that the incorporated territories would have full U.S. rights, but the unincorporated territories would not.